I'm Dr. Jen with White Wave Bodywork, and today I'd like to talk to you about foundations for kneeling poses on hands and knees. So the first thing we're going to talk about is your hand placement. When I ask people to do things on their hands and knees, a lot of times people will start to tell me that it hurts their hands to be in this position when they're loaded, or that it hurts their wrists specifically. So there's a couple different modifications. If that doesn't feel comfortable for you, a lot of them end up doing fists facing each other, and that works for them. But what I try to invite them to do is actually open up their hands, because one of the reasons it hurts people's wrists is because they don't have this extension in their wrist available to them because things are tight. And one of the things, as we're aging, as we're getting older, our wrists don't like to extend, and our fingers don't like to open. This is what I'm noticing when I'm working with people. So encouraging that motion to happen with exercises that create that, I think is very important to try to keep that mobility. So one of the tools that I encourage them to use is basically a prop, to prop their wrists and the heels of their hands up as they're doing this, okay? So what I want you to do is roll up a hand towel. This is just a normal hand towel. I just rolled it up, and we're just going to place our hands on top of the hand towel underneath the heels if it feels like, as you're going through this, that it's too much for your wrists. So let me start this way with the hand placement. What you're gonna do is go to a mirror and look at yourself in the mirror. If you can have like a mirror on the floor, or have somebody else look at you and see outer shoulder width to the center of the wrist crease, and if that's a straight line. So sometimes I'll see people lined up like this, which feels like you're underneath your shoulders, but that's more like the inner shoulder to the wrist instead of the outer shoulder to the wrist. One of the other ways that I like to measure that is after I feel like I found that on a yoga mat, I know about myself that outer shoulder width distance, when I have my fingers spread nice and wide, like we're gonna want them, my pinkies touch the edge of my mat. So that's something that I know, if I just go to place my hands where my pinkies are touching the edge of my mat and all of my fingers are spread nice and wide, then I know that I'm in the right place, because I've measured that before. So working on a yoga mat is helpful because it helps you determine how wide your hands need to be and just have a place to remember it. And everybody's shoulder width is different, so it's going to be different for you. The other thing that I want to bring to your attention is how your wrists look when you place them. So when you place your hands, you don't want it so that your thumbs are pointed forward, or your pointer fingers are pointed forward, or none of that necessarily. What you want to look at is the wrist crease going straight across. If you were to draw a line from your wrist crease to your wrist crease, is it straight across? Because if I turn out like this, it looks like my wrist creases are going to create like a little triangle if I draw those lines. And if I turn them in, it's like the triangle is coming in towards me with those wrist creases. So ideally you want that wrist crease to go straight across. Sometimes you'll hear a yoga teacher say parallel with the front of your mat. So wrist creases straight across, parallel with the front of your mat. The next thing is keeping your fingers spread evenly, like an even distance between each finger, spread nice and wide, and trying to grip the mat with your fingertips. So when your fingers are gripping the mat, it almost looks like you have claws. I'm going to come a little closer to the screen and see if you can see my fingertips. So I'm trying to keep all of my fingertips down, or all of my, yes, fingertips are down, but all of my knuckles down. And a lot of times I'll see this front knuckle start to come up when things get a little too difficult in some of the exercises where people's hands are planted. So I specifically, a lot of times I'm cueing people to keep this pointer knuckle down. And then the tips of your fingers are gripping like you have claws. So they turn white, or they lighten at the end, okay? So fingers spread nice and wide and gripping. And what happens when we grip is that we take a lot of the pressure off the heel of a hand. So a lot of times, if it's uncomfortable for someone to do this, instead of just jumping to that towel roll, I'll ask them to really grip with their fingertips and see if that can create enough of an arch in the hand that they can take some of the pressure off the heel of their hand. Because when the hands get lazy, then you're just kind of slamming into the heels of your hands. But when your fingers are gripping, it's just like your feet. They have an arch and they lift, and there's action in these fingers, and it takes some of the pressure off of the wrist. So that's something to try before you just jump to using a prop. Props are great. I think it's really important to use them when you need them, but push yourself as far as you can go using good mechanics before jumping to an assistive device that's going to limit you ultimately. Okay, so we've got our hands spread nice and wide, our fingers spread nice and wide, and our hands are underneath our shoulders at the outer shoulder distance apart. Your fingers are gripping, clawing the mat. The fingertips are white, and the heels of your hands don't have so much pressure in them because you're gripping to lift that arch. All the knuckles are down. The next thing I want to look at is how I place my knees, that distance between my hands and my knees, to see where my shoulders are going to load. I want my shoulders to be on top of those arches in my hand, not necessarily so far forward here. That puts a lot of pressure on that extension moment in the wrist there. It's like more than 90 degrees, so that's a lot of pressure. And back here, you're loading the joints so that there is less pressure on the wrist, so that might be another thing that you could use as a modification so that you're not all the way up here. But ideally what I'm trying to aim for is that my shoulders are over the arch of the palm of my hand. The other thing about the knee distance is you want them to be loaded underneath your hips. So, not knees together, not knees way out here, but straight underneath your hips, okay? So straight in that direction and straight in this direction. So now that we've got our hands underneath our shoulders and our knees underneath our hips, we can do activities like stepping into plank, like cat-cow, like what I call look at your butt, so side bending, things like thread the needle. There's all kinds of poses that are loaded. We can even do these kinds of activities. Anything where you're loaded on your hands and your knees. That's how I want to guide someone to set up for that activity. So I know that's a lot of details and information, and I wanted to do a separate video for that, laying that foundation, because I'd like to refer people back to this one before they go and do some of those activities. It just takes a long time to explain. So to keep my videos a little bit bite-sized and shorter, I'm just going to invite people to watch this as the foundation and then go into some of those exercises. I hope you learned something. Thanks for watching. See you next time.